The Democratic Republic of the Congo is located in Central Africa. The history of the Congo is described in this way: a history of repeated exploitation through greed, a hub of the slave trade from which over 5 million people were taken, a colonial period of continuous exploitation by Belgium, a man who privatized the country for 32 years. We rarely see the Congo appear in daily news coverage. However, by unraveling the history of this country, we can see the tragedy created by human greed. Hello everyone, I'm Kanta. On Kanta's channel, we have looked at various issues around the world, using the Democratic Republic of Congo as a starting point. In this video, we will look at 500 years of the Congo's history, also known as microcosm of the world's darkness. Learning about the Congo's history could change your view of the world 180 degrees. Because of the grand theme of 500 years, this video is divided into two parts. Please watch until the end. Civilizations emerged near great rivers, and the Congo in Africa is no exception. The Kingdom of Congo is the first to appear in the 500-year history of the Congo. The Congo River, the second longest river in Africa, meanders through a vast basin and flows into the Atlantic Ocean. The Kingdom of Congo existed in the lower basin of the Congo River from around the late 14th century. In this video, we will look at the history of the Congo from the time of the kingdom's first encounter with the European world, when it first came into contact with the Portuguese, who arrived at the mouth of the Congo River in the late 15th century. From the 15th century onward, a period of discovery of new continents began as European countries expanded overseas, Portugal and Spain standing at the forefront. This is the so-called Age of Discovery. You may have learned about the Age of Discovery in your history class. When you hear stories like Magellan circumnavigated the globe or Columbus discovered the Americas, you may feel as if Europeans have accomplished some great feat. However, as a matter of course, both the Americas and Africa existed before Europeans discovered new continents. The discovery is only from the European point of view. From the perspective of the local people who originally lived there, the Age of Discovery was the beginning of an era of exploitation by Europeans. The Portuguese first discovered the Congo River in 1482, near the end of the 15th century. Since that time, the Kingdom of Congo and Portugal have developed close relations. When Portugal and the Kingdom of Congo first came into contact, the two countries were on equal footing. A brotherly relationship was established between King Afonso, who ruled the kingdom at the time, and King Manuel of Portugal, and the two countries became equals. In the letters exchanged between the two kings, there were descriptions of mutual respect for each other as brother kings. It is said that ambassadors were exchanged and tributes presented by each other. Hearing that the two countries were on equal footing in the beginning may come as a surprise to those who know the story of the slave trade, in which Africa was subsequently exploited by Europe. There were slaves in the original Kingdom of Congo, and even in the trade with Portugal when the two countries were on equal footing, slaves were still exported. However, slaves at that time were essentially different from the slaves dealt with in the subsequent European-led slave trade, the so-called Atlantic Triangular Trade. This is because slaves in traditional African societies meant those who were enslaved only temporarily, such as prisoners of war, and after being held for a certain period of time, they became independent, free human beings. The slaves supplied by the Kingdom of Congo during this period were also slaves as prisoners of war, which had been practiced traditionally. However, in the 16th century, 100 years after the reign of King Afonso, the relationship of equality between the kingdom and Portugal began to break down. From this time on, the Kingdom of Congo was incorporated into the system of European domination, and the number of slaves as export goods increased dramatically. The Kingdom of Congo then became the center of the slave trade in Africa. Why did the number of slaves exported from the Kingdom of Congo increase rapidly from this period? How did slaves become a commodity? It is because a large amount of labor was needed on the new continent, and the demand for slaves skyrocketed. In the 16th century, European countries such as Portugal, Spain, and even the Netherlands, England, and France began to operate vast plantations in the New World, namely the Americas and the West Indies. Sugar and cotton grown on these plantations were exported to Europe, and the lives of Europeans rapidly became richer. However, growing large quantities of crops on plantations required an enormous amount of labor. The labor force of the local indigenous Indios alone was limited. So the Europeans came up with the idea of importing slaves from the distant African continent as laborers on the plantations. Such a pressure from the outside world, that is, the need for a large amount of labor to manage the plantations on the new continent, created a structure in which a large number of slaves was intentionally created, not as prisoners of war as in the past. In other words, slaves became commodities rather than prisoners of war. The Europeans gave weapons to the obedient peoples who were convenient for them, had them attack other peoples, and collected a large number of slaves. This is what is called slave hunting. For those obedient Africans who collected a large number of slaves, more guns and other rewards such as ornaments were given. Thus, slave hunts and the forced collection of slaves in various parts of Africa destroyed traditional societies in various regions and created divisions among African people. The Congo River Basin was also incorporated into the global system of slave supply, and the Kingdom of Congo, once on equal footing with Portugal, gradually became a center of the slave trade. Although it is impossible today to know the exact number, an estimated 2 million slaves were exported to the New World from the Congo's Atlantic ports of Luanda and Benguela alone, during a period of about 150 years from 1680 through 1836, when the slave trade was banned. Including smuggling and other illicit slave exports, the number of slaves taken from the region is estimated to be as high as 5 million. In the process, the once glorious Kingdom of Congo gradually lost its prestige as a country and began to decline. By the early 19th century, it was a dying state. While the lower reaches of the Congo River and other parts of coastal Africa were incorporated into the global system of slave supply, the interior of the Congo, which was difficult for European traders to penetrate due to its topography, was not seriously affected by the slave trade. In particular, the vast rainforest in the interior of the Congo, also known as the Heart of Darkness, was one of the areas that Europeans were slowest to discover. However, from the late 19th century onward, European countries sent expedition after expedition to the African continent and penetrated into the interior. Why did Europe send expeditions and expand into the interior of Africa from this period, even though they had remained in the coastal areas of Africa until then? The reason was that they wanted resources to make various products. At that time, European countries were making progress in the Industrial Revolution, led by Britain, using capital accumulated through the slave trade and industrial technology developed with that capital. From this period, many European countries began to experience remarkable economic development, including large-scale manufacturing. This is the beginning of full-fledged capitalism. Large-scale manufacturing requires large amounts of resources. In order to obtain these resources, European countries began sending expeditions to Africa and penetrating into the hitherto uncharted interior. It was the American explorer Stanley who revealed the entire extent of the vast rainforest area in the interior of the Congo, after spending about 3 years crossing the African continent starting in 1874. And it was King Leopold II of Belgium, the person who later ruled the Congo as his private property, who sponsored Stanley's African expedition. During this period, the Congo region was being contested for territory by European countries. The Berlin Conference was held in 1884 to mediate these disputes, at the urging of German Chancellor Bismarck. The Berlin Conference was attended by 13 countries that wanted to bring the African continent under their control in order to obtain resources and raw materials. Those European countries gathered in Berlin divided the African continent and began full-scale colonial rule. Although there are many different ethnic groups living in Africa, the distribution of ethnic groups was completely ignored when European countries divided Africa, and this was done only on paper. The reason why the borders of Africa are still drawn straight, even today, is because the Europeans drew them on paper, using pens and rulers on their own. Kenyan historian Ogot described the Berlin Conference, which ignored the presence of Africans who originally lived there. There is no precedent in world history for nations from one continent to brazenly gather and justify the partition and occupation of another continent in such a manner. While European countries were colonizing various parts of Africa, the Congo became a private property of a single European, Leopold II, then King of Belgium. Leopold II treated the Congo, an area 60 times larger than Belgium, as if it were his private home garden. After being granted possession of the Congo at the Berlin Conference, Leopold II decided in 1885 to make it an independent state in the form of the Congo Free State. The name Congo Free State may conjure up images of freedom, but this freedom is only what is seen from the European point of view. In other words, it did not mean a country whose inhabitants are free, but rather a country where European countries can trade freely. Leopold II of Belgium was interested in the colonial operations conducted by Belgium's neighbor, the Netherlands, with which Belgium had close historical ties. At the beginning of the 18th century, when Europe was experiencing a coffee boom, the Dutch colonized the Indonesian island of Java and exported coffee produced on Java Island to neighboring European countries, thereby making huge profits. Taking a cue from this Dutch colonial rule, Leopold II also planned to increase Belgium's national power from the Congo. Leopold II, who ruled the Congo, turned his attention to natural rubber, which was abundant in the region. During this period, bicycle industry was expanding in Europe, and the demand for rubber needed to produce tires was skyrocketing. Leopold II therefore turned his attention to the Congo, which was one of the largest rubber-producing areas in the world at the time. Leopold II, who ruled the Congo, never actually visited there, but tried to obtain vast quantities of natural rubber by forcing Congolese people to work hard. In order for Belgians to establish rubber plantations, they needed land. In the Congo Free State, all lands except those actually occupied and used by the local population were considered state-owned, and all use of natural resources was monopolized by the state. Congolese people living there were not only dispossessed of their land by the sudden arrival of the Belgians, but were also plunged into forced labor for collecting rubber. Those who rebelled against the Belgians or failed to meet their quotas for rubber collection were massacred or had their wrists amputated as an example to others. It is estimated that between 5 and 8 million people were killed when the Congo was the private property of Leopold II. A novel that conveys the reality of the brutal rule in the Congo Free State is titled Heart of Darkness. The novel was written by the English novelist Joseph Conrad, who visited the Congo Free State himself around 1890 and wrote about the scenes he saw there. The title, Heart of Darkness, refers to the darkness of the interior of the Congo, or the interior of Africa, which was still an uncharted territory for Europeans at the time, but it also refers to the darkness of the human mind, and moreover, the darkness of Western civilization. At that time, Europe experienced rapid economic growth and people's lives became affluent. But behind such affluent lives, there were sacrifices made by people living in Africa. If you are a regular viewer of my videos, you may feel that this is exactly what is happening even today. The reality of the brutal ruling in the Congo Free State became a major scandal in Europe at the time. In 1908, the Congo, which had been the private property of King Leopold II, was colonized as a state by Belgium. This extraordinary regime ruled by a single European owning a country solely as his private property lasted for a total of 23 years. However, even after Belgium as a nation became the colonial ruler of the Congo, the system of Belgian exploitation of the abundant natural resources lying in the Congo did not change that much. Systems of exploitation of oil palms, gold, copper, cobalt, diamonds, and other resources were created by companies established mainly by Belgian finance capital. During World War I, for example, Congolese residents were forced to work 120 days out of the year. Many lost their lives due to starvation and disease, and Congolese society suffered a major decline. During the Belgian colonial period, the mining industry centered on the production of copper, which was found untapped in abundance in the Congo. In 1906, Belgian and British capital established the Union Miniers, which monopolized copper production in the Congo. Copper production began in earnest in 1910 and expanded rapidly after World War I, accounting for 7% of total world production in 1928. It is also true that the economic activities of Union Miniers significantly impacted the Congo and contributed to its economic development and national finance, especially after World War II. During this period, the Congolese population grew rapidly and a small but growing middle class emerged among the local population. This middle class would later lead the movement for independence from Belgium. Also, in 1959, the year before independence from Belgium, as much as 50% of the Congolese government's annual revenue came from taxes paid by Union Miniers. On the other hand, the Congo's abundant mineral resources such as copper placed the country at the forefront of conflicting global interests. Just prior to its independence from Belgium, the Congo produced a great many minerals, including copper, cobalt, diamonds, and tin. This was during the Cold War, a time of conflict between the capitalist camp led by the United States and the socialist camp led by the Soviet Union. In particular, countries such as the US and Belgium depended deeply on the Congo because cobalt, a mineral necessary for the production of bombs, existed only in the Congo and the Soviet Union. In particular, the Katanga province in southern Congo, where Union Miniers was based, was one of the most resource-rich areas. The greatest economic benefits were generated from the Katanga province. Congo gained independence from Belgian colonial rule in 1960, but the greatest concern for the US, Belgium, and other Western countries was how to continue to secure their interests in the Katanga province. As a result, even after independence from Belgium, the Congo continued to suffer from intervention by foreign powers due to its rich natural resources. The Congo is often described as the richest and the poorest country at the same time. Despite its natural resources, which are coveted around the world, the Democratic Republic of Congo is still one of the poorest countries in the world. Because of its abundant natural resources, it is exploited by foreign powers and continues to suffer from humanitarian crises and human rights violations. The victims are always the ordinary Congolese people. This has not changed for 100 years to the present, since Leopold II began his colonial ruling. This is why the Congo is called the epitome of darkness in the world. Now I am concluding the first half of this video. I explained the history of the Congo from the time of slave trade to the period just before independence. In the second half, I would like to explain the period of confusion after independence from the Belgian colony and the Second Congo conflict, also known as the World War in Africa. I will upload the second half soon, so if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and wait for it. Since this is an attempt to explain 500 years of history on YouTube, I may have rushed too much or not fully explained for some parts. I would like to make another video that delves deeper into each historical event. I myself had learned little about African history in school classes, and most of the history of Africa I learned, if any, was depicted from the European point of view. If you look at the history of the world from the African point of view, your view of history and the world may change 180 degrees. I will continue to bring you new perspectives, so if you are looking forward to viewing the second half of the video, Please support me by clicking the like button or by leaving any comments. I will keep uploading videos related to the Congo, so if you would like to continue learning about the Congo, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you again for watching to the end. See you again in the next video.